We want to restore the children's health. We want to make sure that NIH is producing as much as it can and turn America back to a lot more smiles than we've seen. With that, I yield the floor, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, it's my understanding that at 12:15 morning business expired, but I'm going to ask unanimous consent that I may proceed as if we were in morning business for 15 minutes.
Without objection.
I thank the acting presiding officer. Mr. President, I rise today to once again speak out against what I consider to be and many consider to be a regulatory assault on our nation's economy. I previously discussed my concerns with regulations having a negative impact on our agriculture community. That was just this last week. And then earlier this week I spoke about what I consider to be the egregious regulations that are being promulgated by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, or what Senator Grassley calls the End of Production Agriculture Agency. And today I rise to talk about health care regulations that patients and providers have brought to my attention. I've listed a number of these regulations in a letter that I sent earlier today to President Obama, which I ask to be included in the record at this point.
Without objection.
As I have already discussed on the Senate floor, an executive order was issued by the President on January 18. It was a good order. I applauded that order. And it committed all federal agencies to review regulations and then to try to remove any that place unreasonable burdens on our nation's businesses and or impact the ability of our economy to grow, to recover. And I agree that in light of our current economic crisis, establishing a regulatory environment that promotes growth and job creation should be the number one priority for this Congress and administration. And I applauded what the President said when he issued the executive order, that are some that are duplicative, that are costly, unnecessary, and then he said, and downright stupid. And there was loud applause throughout farm country and about all manufacturing, health care, education, you name it. But after reviewing the executive order, reading the executive order, I want to remind my colleagues that I was left, and I hope that if you read it, you are left with some larger concerns. Specifically, the executive order left open a number of very large loopholes. It was an executive order without teeth. And when I was in Kansas over this past last work period, I talked to virtually all of our Kansas patients and providers, advocates about the President's executive order and my legislation, which is called the Regulatory Reform of Our Economy Act. And I held a stakeholder roundtable in Topeka, a provider round table in our state capital, to get feedback from patients and providers on their thoughts that are related to health care reform. And I was not surprised to hear that every representative at that meeting had a concern with regulations, but the sheer volume by my staff assistant and myself was truly extraordinary, just extraordinary. I was already aware of the regulations, such as those put forth by the Department of Health and Human Services, along with the Department of Labor and Treasury, that have resulted in the child-only insurance markets effectively disappearing in 20 states. That's the result of over-regulation or over-requirements. And I've already sent letters to the administration detailing my concerns with regulations such as, stick with me now, first, the 2011 Medicare Physician Fee Schedule, final rule, which requires that laboratory requisition forms are signed by the ordering physician. This rule could have potentially serious implications on patient care and business practice. Second, November 17, 2010, CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicaid Services, issued a final rule, which, as required by the new health care law, and that's the acronym for that is PPAKA, PPACA, conditions payment for home health and hospice services based upon a face-to-face encounter between patients and their physicians or certain non-physician practitioners prior to certification for home health or hospice services. Now, this is resulting on top of about an $11 billion cut to hospice, which is rather incredible. This is resulting in burdensome requirements for our rural home health and hospice patients. For those who need this help the most, this is truly hard to understand. Third, anti-switching rules. In Medicare's competitive bidding program, the acronym for that is CBP. There's always an acronym for everything. For durable medical equipment, prosthetics, orthotics, and supplies. Specifically, that the proposal to enforce the rule in subsequent rounds of the competitive bidding program, but not round one, may compromise beneficiary access to appropriate diabetes testing supplies and leave beneficiaries vulnerable to pressure from suppliers to switch testing systems. I'm just going to try to get rid of the gobbledygook here and say that during the competitive round, in regards to DME, durable medical equipment, some of the suppliers didn't even know there was a competitive round. In the metropolitan area of Kansas City, there were 424 suppliers. 20 submitted bids this time around. We delayed it 1 year because it was so onerous. And then the next year came around and CMS selected 20. My question is, what happened to the other 404? And what happened to the people who depended on pharmacists and home health care providers for that walker or the crutch or whatever that they really needed, or an oxygen tank for that matter? So we're left with huge holes in the home health care industry and providing DME equipment. Again, I was surprised to hear that every representative at this stakeholder meeting, and I would tell you that everybody was invited, hospital administrators and doctors, obviously nurses, pharmacists, hospital ambulance drivers, hospice folks, and first time they ever met at the same table. And I was surprised to hear that every representative at this stakeholder meeting to discuss the impacts of health care reform had concerns with regulation, some of which are buried in the volume of regulations being put out every day, and many that defy comprehension. When discussing the President's executive order now and regulations with my constituents, those representing the patient and provider community, the number one concern that I heard was a fear not of current regulations, which they're trying to really keep up with, but of future regulations. There is considerable concern with the burden of regulations that have already been issued. I heard time and time again there is an even greater concern with the uncertainty of future regulations, especially those implementing the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or PPAC as the acronym says, and their potential to have further and greater impact on jobs and the economy and health care, even greater than the impacts we discussed during the health care reform debate. That was very we had meaningful dialogue about that bill. This is like the second health care reform earthquake, not a debate. If you are a health care provider, hang on. Additionally, I have heard that the combination of the regulations being issued to implement PPACA, or the statute, have resulted in an increase in premiums. Let me repeat that, an increase in premiums, not costs, savings, for individuals and businesses, which, as you know, or what we all know, results in increased costs and very, very tough choices. Related to this, I'm concerned by reports that I am hearing that staff within the administration have signaled that regulations being issued to implement the PPACA statute already comply with the President's executive order and would not need to be included in a review. Does that mean that all the health care regulations pouring out of CMS are not going to be subject to the President's executive order? What is that? This is one of the biggest worries we have all throughout the country in regards to health care. And the President issues an executive order and says, let's take a look. Do the costs outweigh the benefit? Are they duplicative? Are they unnecessary? Or are they just plain stupid, in his words? But CMS is exempted. Health care is exempted. That's unreal. I believe otherwise, and this belief is being verified by personal stories from Kansans. In my letter to the President today, I strongly encouraged him to review all of the regulations that have been issued, past, present, and future, while considering their impact on our economy and jobs. Sure, it'd be a slowdown. Sure, it'd be a tough job. It's time. It's time with the Katrina of regulations that are pouring out of the various agencies in Washington. Understanding this last month, I, along with Senator Barrasso, Senator Coates, and with the support of 37 of my Senate colleagues, more, by the way, have introduced the Regulatory Responsibility for Our Economy Act, S-358. I urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I'm going to engage you in the next week. You'll get tired of me in terms of the same face-to-face requirements I guess we have to have in terms of hospice. But we'll go face-to-face, and I'll try to convince you. My bill moves to codify and strengthen President Obama's January 18th executive order that directs agencies within the administration to review, to modify, to streamline, to expand, or repeal those significant regulatory actions that are, in the President's words, duplicative, unnecessary, overly burdensome, or would have significant economic impacts on Americans. That's President Obama, and I give him credit for saying that. I don't give him credit for the loopholes. While I agree in principle with the President that we need to take a serious look at both current and proposed federal regulations, I just don't think his executive order actually does what it purports to do. I have some loopholes listed. I would only say in Dodge City, where I come from, that coming close to the truth is coming pretty close, but it still ain't the truth. And I think this is where this fits. Let's just listen to this loophole. The executive order states, and I want everybody in the Senate, if you are listening or if our staff is listening, please provide this to the member. See if you can figure this one out. In applying these principles, each agency is directed to use the best available techniques to quantify anticipated present and future benefits and cost as accurately as possible. That's a good thing. That's a good statement. Then it goes on. Where appropriate, however, and permitted by law, each agency may consider and discuss qualitatively, and I suppose those discussions are going on right now as I speak, and this is the part where I had the most concern, and I hope somebody can explain it to me or to anybody, values that are difficult or impossible to quantify, including equity, human dignity, fairness, and distributive impacts. What is that? Well, the Wall Street Journal captured it so very eloquently in their response to the President's editorial that he sent them. The Wall Street Journal said these amorphous concepts are not measurable at all, and they're not. Mr. President, on the surface, I feel that this language has the potential to be a very large loophole, probably is already. I believe that this is the loophole being used to exempt the PPACA regulations from this review. That's unfortunate. In fact, upon reading and rereading it, it could be better classified, quite frankly, as gobbledygook. My legislation would close, as a matter of fact, it got my gobbledygook award of the month here this past month. For March. My legislation would close the loophole in President Obama's executive order, the loopholes, I should say, and would close other existing loopholes, including those that the administration has been using, or the secretaries of the various agencies have been using, to bypass valuable stakeholder input on regulation, the folks that the regulations impact. In fact, I hear often that patients and providers feel they do not have a voice in the regulatory process. More specifically, I hear that a number of regulations are currently being issued through a shortened process, which allows limited or no input from those most affected by the regulations prior to their implementation. That's wrong. And they may result in an even greater confusion and burden, which then results in greater cost and economic impact, especially if changes are necessary based on later comments that the administration does receive. It is my understanding that the PPACA rules that have been issued as interim final rules and therefore with limited input, and they'll probably become final, are the National Provider Identifier. That's a number that every provider would have to have. Read George Orwell for that one. Web portal requirements, early retiree reinsurance program, coverage of children to age 26. We don't even have the regs out yet, but they're coming, and you hear a lot about that. Underserved rural communities, that is my attention. Grandfathered health plans, pre-existing condition exclusions, preventive services, internal claims / appeal and external review processes, pre-existing condition insurance plan program, amendment to grandfathered health plans rule, medical loss ratio requirements. That's a bunch of them. All regulations, shortened up. While there may have been instances in which a shortened process was necessary or appropriate, this lengthy list is why passage of my legislation is so critically important. I would ask the acting presiding officer if I've exceeded my time. If I have, I would like 2 additional minutes to close.
The Senator has 30 seconds.
May I have 2 additional minutes on top of the 30, and then I can close? And
Without objection.
I thank the President, the acting presiding officer. In my letter to the President today, I have encouraged the administration to limit the use of this regulatory process and take every available opportunity to get feedback from those who would be most affected by these regulations. That just makes sense. And allow for ample time to review and consider the feedback prior to implementing the future regulatory priorities. We're going to have better regulations if, in fact, you ask folks, hey, is this going to work? And they can tweak it, maybe repeal it. Who knows? The President himself said that. In addition, I have encouraged the administration to review any comments you have received on these regulations and that have already been issued for any concerns that indicate a potential to further our economic problems and crises. In closing, I invite my friends on both sides of the aisle, sign on as a co-sponsor of my legislation, realize the immense opportunities it creates for meaningful review and possible revocation of regulations counter to our nation's growth. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Mr. President.
Will the Senator withhold his suggestion for the absence of a quorum?
I would be delighted to, sir.
Okay. Senator from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to speak about Judge Max Cogburn, Jr., judicial nominee for the United States District Court in the Western District of North Carolina.
Three and four. Morning business. Okay. Morning business is now closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination: Max Oliver Cogburn, Jr. of North Carolina to be United States District Judge.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Thank you. I would like to talk about Judge Max Cogburn, Jr., judicial nominee for the United States District Court in the Western District of North Carolina. Judge Cogburn was nominated for the second time by President Obama on January the 5th, 2011, and was favorably reported out of the Judiciary Committee by voice vote on February 3rd, 2011. It is extremely important to me that North Carolina has highly capable representation on our federal courts. Judge Cogburn is exactly the type of legal mind that we need as a judge on North Carolina's Western District Court. Since coming to the U.S. Senate, I have worked to increase the number of North Carolinians on our federal judiciary. Unfortunately, it has turned out to be a rather slow and arduous process. And after months of making the case that North Carolina deserves more representation on the Fourth Circuit last year, Judges Jim Wynn and Al Diaz were confirmed unanimously by the United States Senate. North Carolina is better off because Judges Jim Wynn and Al Diaz, highly qualified, experienced, and fair-minded judges, are now serving on the Fourth Circuit. And it is my hope that very soon North Carolina will have another federal judge with the confirmation of Judge Cogburn. All of these judges have received bipartisan support, and I am pleased that Senator Burr has joined with me in recommending these judges. I recommended Judge Cogburn because of his distinguished record as a jurist and attorney in both the public and private sectors. After earning degrees from Samford University Cumberland School of Law and UNC Chapel Hill, he entered private practice. Judge Cogburn has worked in private practice on and on since 1976, handling criminal felonies and misdemeanors, civil torts, domestic cases, and corporate work. Judge Cogburn also served as an assistant United States attorney from 1980 to 1992, where he prosecuted murder cases, drug trafficking, voter fraud, and a wide variety of federal crimes. During his time with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Judge Cogburn served as the lead attorney on the Organized Crime and Drug Task Force, as well as the chief assistant U.S. attorney. And from 1995 to 2004, Judge Cogburn served as magistrate judge on the United States District Court for the Western District of North Carolina. As a magistrate judge, he ruled on cases involving sexual harassment, racial discrimination in employment, fraud, age discrimination, products liability, and medical malpractice. Judge Cogburn has received the American Bar Association's highest rating of well qualified. He has the skills and legal experience that this position requires. And I am pleased to speak about Judge Cogburn's outstanding qualifications to serve on the U.S. District Court for the Western District of North Carolina. And I am confident that Judge Cogburn will serve on the bench with clarity and distinction. I've worked steadily to see that he is confirmed quickly, and I look forward to casting that vote shortly. I ask my Senate colleagues to join me and Senator Burr in support of Judge Cogburn's nomination and vote in favor of his confirmation. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Mr. President, I'd also like to talk about this historic day. And it's historic because we're actually going to confirm Max Cogburn faster than it took for the nomination to come through. Now, today in this austere body, that's an accomplishment. But in large measure, it says a lot about the President's nominee. Max Cogburn has been nominated to the federal bench, North Carolina's Western District. He is an excellent choice, and I believe will be a needed but great addition to the court. The Cogburn family roots are in western North Carolina's mountains, and they run, Mr. President, deep. It's an impressive family history, but Max has made a name for himself in his legal career, his public service, assistant U.S. attorney, chief assistant U.S. attorney, magistrate judge, and in private practice. In addition to his legal career, which certainly qualifies him for the bench in his own right, the Cogburn's other business can't help but be a benefit. You see, he and his family run a dude ranch outside of Asheville, North Carolina. I want to thank the members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, as I said, for acting so quickly on this nomination. Nominees to the federal bench are bestowed with a high honor, but also a high amount of uncertainty and stress as they and their families go through a sometimes never-ending process. I'm grateful that this process has been relatively short and sweet for Max. He was nominated in May of 2010, had his hearings during the lame duck, and was reported out in December, still during the lame duck. I'm sorry that this body missed the opportunity at that time to finalize his confirmation. He didn't get a vote in the last Congress, but that, of course, isn't unusual for a nominee of either party who were reported by the committee as late in the process. He was reported out again in February and is actually getting a vote in less time, as I said, than it took the White House to nominate him, especially following the departure and the retirement of Judge Thornburg. Mr. President, I appreciate the judiciary's commitment to move quickly and the action to move quickly. I join my colleague, Senator Hagan, in encouraging all of our colleagues to unanimously support this appointment to the federal bench. And I might say in conclusion, Mr. President, the underlying reason Max Cogburn should get the overwhelming support of all the members of the United States Senate and should be the newest member of our court in the Western District is Max Cogburn's a good man. He comes from good stock, but on his own. He's a good man and a great American, and today he deserves this House to unanimously support this nomination. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business with the understanding that I'll yield the floor if anyone comes to the floor to speak on the Cogburn nomination.
Without objection.
I thank the Chair. Mr. President, I rise to speak in support of a bipartisan resolution that has been introduced by our colleague Senator Durbin and that I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of, which concerns the situation in the country of Belarus. As the winds of democratic change have been sweeping now across North Africa and the Middle East, ousting autocratic rulers who've been long entrenched there, it's important for us to remember that there still is one remaining dictatorship in Europe, and that is in the country of Belarus. In the 20 years since the fall of the Soviet Union, Belarus's neighbors to the north and west have become successful, prosperous democracies. But tragically, while Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia have broken the chains of tyranny and joined the flagship institutions of the Euro-Atlantic world, NATO and the European Union, Belarus and its people have been left behind, held behind by its despotic ruler, Alexander Lukashenko, who has ruled his country through repression and rigged elections for nearly 2 decades. Some in the United States and Europe had hoped in recent years that Lukashenko might be prepared to open up Belarus and change his ways. These hopes, however, came to an abrupt end on December 19th of last year when Belarus held presidential elections. And thousands, as it quickly became clear that the vote in those elections was neither free nor fair, thousands of Belarusian people took to the streets of Minsk in protest, and the Lukashenko regime responded with violence and brutality. This resolution would put the United States Senate on record in response to the crackdown launched in Belarus on December 19th, a crackdown, I would add, Mr. President, that continues in significant ways to this day. More than 600 people were swept up by Belarusian security forces on Election Day and in its immediate aftermath, among them journalists, civil society representatives, political activists, and several opposition presidential candidates. It's hard to believe that this kind of behavior still exists in this world today. The detained continue to be denied access to family, lawyers, medical treatment, and open legal proceedings, while their relatives and attorneys endure harassment by Lukashenko's security forces. This resolution will do several significant things. First, it will send a strong and clear message to Lukashenko himself that his actions are unacceptable and will carry significant costs. It tells him that we do not consider the December 19th election to be legitimate and that he is therefore not the legitimately elected leader of Belarus, and that there should be new elections that are free, fair, and that meet international standards. I would add, Mr. President, that the European Parliament passed a resolution not long ago that says precisely the same thing that I have just said here in the United States Senate. Perhaps even more importantly, this resolution will send a message to the people of Belarus who are struggling to secure their fundamental freedoms. It tells the dissidents there that we have not and will not forget them or their cause, that we remember their names, in fact, and we will stand in solidarity with them until they achieve their goal, which is a free and democratic Belarus. Last month, Senator McCain and I and others traveled to Vilnius, Lithuania, where we met with Belarusian students and opposition leaders. I can tell you it was an extremely powerful experience for all of us. We heard directly from them about the repression taking place in their home country. The substance of the resolution Senator Durbin has written and submitted with co-sponsorship by several of us reflects what the Belarusians we met with in Vilnius told us, as well as what we heard from other dissidents from that country here in Washington. The resolution specifically calls for the immediate and unconditional release of all political prisoners in Belarus. It also urges a tightening of the sanctions against Lukashenko, and we are urging the Obama administration to offer the strongest possible material and technical support for Belarusian civil society, and that includes, of course, the political opposition. This resolution is broadly bipartisan in its sponsorship and reflects what I think is a wide consensus here in the Senate about the situation in Belarus today. I know that there are some who may look at the resolution and say it's merely symbolic, who say there's nothing we can do to help the people who are living such repressed and unfree lives in Belarus, and that we should simply accept the reality of the Lukashenko dictatorship after all these years. But if the historic events in Tunisia and Egypt have taught us anything, it is that the United States does best when we stand in our foreign policy with our values and with the people who share them, and that what appear to be even the most impregnable regimes can fall with remarkable speed. Obviously, I cannot say exactly when Belarus will be free, but I have no doubt that someday it will be free. I'm confident that the future of Belarus belongs not to Lukashenko and his cronies, but to the people of that great country, to the dissidents who are in jail, to the students we met in Vilnius last month, to the civil society activists who are being harassed by the KGB as we speak. It belongs to the people in Belarus who want a future of democracy and economic opportunity, not Soviet-style repression. This resolution, put together, again I say with thanks, by Senator Durbin, puts us, the Senate, on the side of the people of Belarus and against the Lukashenko regime that is repressing them, oppressing them. I hope that we can come together and swiftly pass this bipartisan measure. I thank the Chair. I yield the floor, and I would yield to the Senator from Iowa.
Senator from Iowa.
Yeah. Soon we'll be voting on another nominee for district court. We continue our rapid pace in which the Senate has been confirming President Obama's judicial nominees. This vote will mark the 11th judicial nominee to be confirmed this Congress. That's more than double the number confirmed in the 108th Congress, which only saw 5 confirmations at this point. Obviously, actions speak louder than words. So far, our actions have had concrete results. The Judiciary Committee met this morning and reported 6 more judicial nominees. That puts the total at 22 nominees reported favorably so far. We continue to hold hearings every 2 weeks and have heard from 31 nominees currently pending before the Senate. As I have said in the past, we will continue to move consensus nominees through the confirmation process. However, we will continue to do our due diligence in evaluating the nominees. What we will not do is put quantity confirmed over quality confirmed. These lifetime appointments are too important to the federal judiciary and the American people to allow rubber stamping. Just this past Monday, the Senate confirmed 3 district court judges. In his statement for the record, the chairman of the committee, Senator Leahy, stated, quote, "Nearly 1 out of every 8 federal judgeships is vacant. This puts at serious risk the ability of all Americans to have a fair hearing in court," end of quote. However, what the chairman neglected to mention is the fact that President Obama has not put forth a nominee for every vacancy the court currently faces. In fact, of the 95 judicial vacancies, the Senate only has 45 nominees. That's 53% of the vacancies without a nominee from the White House. Today, we vote on a nominee to sit on the Western District, North Carolina. While this is an important vacancy, a vacancy we need to fill, it is not a judicial emergency. However, there is a judicial emergency in the Eastern District of North Carolina. That seat, which has been vacant since 2005, does not have a nominee currently pending. President Bush nominated Thomas Alvin Farr to that seat twice, but he was never afforded a hearing, let alone an up or down vote.
I'm happy that this side of the aisle is not repeating the same regrettable treatment that Mr. Farr received. With regard to Mr. Cogburn, the nominee we'll be voting on, the American Bar Association has rated him majority well-qualified, minority qualified. He received his B.A. from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Juris Doctorate from Cumberland School of Law. Mr. Cogburn has practiced law in many capacities. Through his work in private practice, he has worked on a wide range of issues, including criminal litigation, personal injury, civil litigation, and a significant amount of mediation. As an assistant U.S. attorney for over a decade, Mr. Cogburn gained substantial appellate experience. While there, he also served as Drug Task Force attorney and chief assistant U.S. attorney. Mr. Cogburn also holds judicial experience. He was appointed to serve an 8-year term as a U.S. magistrate judge for the U.S. District Court for Western District of North Carolina. After a careful evaluation, the Judiciary Committee reported this fine nominee by voice vote on February the 3rd, 2011. I congratulate Mr. Cogburn and his family on this important lifetime appointment and his willingness to continue in public service. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President,
Senator from Nevada.
ask the quorum call be dismissed with.
Without objection.
Ask consent that all time be yielded back and the vote start.
Without objection. Clerk
And
will call the roll.
ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a second? There appears to be. There is. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Mr. Barrasso.
So when I, Burrs, I go. You got Ensign?
I did. I saw it.
Turn off your...
Mr. Bacchus. Mr. Begich. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. Ms. Boxer. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Conrad, Mr. Coons, Mr. Corker, Mr. Cornyn, Mr. Crapo, Mr. DeMint, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Ensign, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hutchison, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Inouye, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Kerry, Mr. Kirk, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Cole, Mr. Kyle, Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lugar, Mr. Manchin, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, Mr. Nelson of Florida, Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Sessions, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Snow, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thurn, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall, Colorado, Mr. Udall, New Mexico, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Mr. Webb, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Barrasso, Brown of Massachusetts, Brown of Ohio, Burr, Coburn, Collins, Durbin, Ensign, Franken, Grassley, Hagan, Isaacson, Johnson of Wisconsin, Klobuchar, Lautenberg, Levin, Lieberman, Moran, Murray, Nelson of Nebraska, Paul, Portman, Rubio, Sanders, Vitter, Wicker. Ms. Ayotte. Ms. Ayotte? Aye. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Leahy? Aye. No senators voting in the negative. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Lugar? Aye. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johans? Aye. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer? Aye. Ms. Stabenow. Ms. Stabenow? Aye. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island? Aye. Mr. Tester. Mr. Tester? Aye. Ms. Mikulski? Aye. Mr. Coons? Mr. Coons? Aye. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts. Aye. Mr. Inouye. Mr. Inouye. Aye. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mrs. Gillibrand. Aye. Mr. Akaka. Mr. Akaka. Aye. Mr. Begich. Mr. Begich. Aye. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coates. Aye. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal. Aye. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Wyden. Aye. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee. Aye. Ms. Shaheen. Ms. Shaheen. Aye. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Aye. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner. Aye. Mr. Kerry. Mr. Kerry. Aye. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman. Aye. Mr. DeMint. Mr. DeMint. Aye. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven. Aye. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Hatch. Aye. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Crapo. Aye. Mr. Webb. Mr. Webb. Aye. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch. Aye. Mr. Kyle. Mr. Kyle. Aye. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Whitehouse. Aye. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rockefeller. Aye. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell. Aye. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Pryor. Aye. Mr. Corker. Mr. Corker. Aye. Mr. McCain. Mr. McCain, aye. Ms. McCaskill. Ms. McCaskill, aye. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Casey. Mr. Casey, aye. Ms. Snow. Ms. Snow, aye. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, aye. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Cardin, aye. Mr. Cochran. Mr. Cochran, aye. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson of Florida, aye. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Blunt, aye. Ms. Landrieu. Ms. Landrieu, aye. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Toomey, aye. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, aye. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Menendez, aye. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Conrad, aye. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, aye. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Baucus, aye. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Manchin, aye. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Udall. Mr. Udall, Colorado, aye. Ms. Cantwell. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. Kirk. Mr. Kirk, aye. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Merkley, aye. Mr. Carper. Mr. Carper, aye. Ms. Mikulski. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Aye. Chambliss. Mr. Chambliss. Aye.
That way you can also get your count. You know how many you look.
Ms. Feinstein. Ms. Feinstein. Aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune. Aye. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Bingaman. Aye. Mr. Enzi. Mr. Enzi. Aye. Mr. Alexander. Mr. Alexander. Aye. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Harkin. Aye.
Any senators wishing to vote or change their vote? If not, confirmation of Max Oliver Cogburn, Jr. is confirmed 96-0. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table. The President shall be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate shall resume legislative session.
Madam President,
Majority Leader.
I now ask unanimous consent the Senate